Question: who wins in a fight between Batman, Goku, Godzilla, and all of the Avengers? The answer? Saitama from One Punch Man. He just came across the battle when he was shopping for groceries. One Punch Man was one of the biggest shows to come out of Japan last year, and with the announcement of the Cape Baldy getting a second season, we thought it was high time to talk about Saitama's powers. As the name of the show suggests, the One Punch Man himself, Saitama, is pretty overpowered. And that's not just me saying that, he openly acknowledges that he has overwhelming power. But more importantly, he's totally bored by it. As it turns out, when there are no stakes whenever you fight monsters, it can all get pretty monotonous. For him, not for us. Saitama is very clearly one of the most powerful beings on Earth, if not the galaxy. Or the universe. But why? Other than his powers, Saitama's a totally normal guy, so how can he have such amazing abilities? Well, there are some theories here and there that think that Saitama might actually be a god with virtually unlimited power and he's just woefully unaware of it. I don't think anyone's gonna refute that Saitama is quite strong. Obvious facts are obvious. He's so strong, in fact, that he seems to have surpassed any human capability. In fact, not even just human capability. His apprentice Genos is a cyborg with artificial limbs, and yet Saitama still crushes him in physical skill, despite still having all of his original parts. Also, in most of the fights we see Saitama take part in, he's actually holding back, because more than anything else, he wants to be challenged. So it's still pretty unclear to us exactly how powerful this guy is. So in the third episode of the anime, Saitama lets us know exactly how he got to be as powerful as he is. What was his big secret? 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and a 10-kilometer run. Every single day. Wait a minute. I mean, that workout's nothing to sneeze at, but really? That's what gave him infinite power after 3 years? And again, I'm not the only one questioning this. Most of the characters in the show straight up don't believe Saitama, including Genos, who says it's not even that intense a workout, and it's definitely not something that would make you capable of destroying monsters with one punch. Part of the reason this theory jumps to Saitama being some sort of unaware god is that there are no shortage of deities in multiple mythologies that are commonly portrayed with skills similar to the ones Saitama has. In Greek mythology alone, you can find gods like Hermes or titans like Atlas who are generally portrayed with being super fast or super strong, respectively. Even the divine hero Heracles was slaying loads of beasts while displaying uncanny strength during his labors toward atonement and immortality. Dude strangled a lion with his bare hands. Greek mythology doesn't mess around. Basically, there's a lot of precedence in mythology for deities to have an abundance of power. And since the characters of the show don't believe Saitama when he tells them his workout routine, it becomes fair to assume that the normal rules of this world don't apply to Saitama, which would therefore elevate him into being some sort of divine being. It's just that Saitama's kind of an airhead and would probably just forget that he's a god, which would explain why he's so bored and frustrated all the time. And while this one bit is far from concrete evidence, once he completes his evaluation with the Hero Association and subsequently breaks all their fitness records, Snek is told by one of the Hero Association officials that it's as if a god resides in Saitama's body. It's an interesting word choice, to say the least. Now, at this point, we can't be sure if the show is going to dive into gods as physical entities. While there is a god threat level, we've never actually seen one. While this, like the last point, is a bit on the nose, could Saitama be the only thing in One Punch Man's universe that would qualify as a god-level threat? Because he is a god? Okay, so now's the time I bring up what everybody who's already familiar with the original One Punch Man webcomic has already typed and left in the comments. While it hasn't been addressed in the anime yet, there has actually been some discussion over how Saitama got his powers. Also, spoilers ahead, you have been warned. In the original webcomic, the founder of the House of Evolution, Dr. Genus, returns and shares with us his theory on how Saitama got his powers specifically. He says that everyone has this thing called a limiter, which is sort of a universal natural skill cap for every living being. This is to keep too much power from being attainable by one being and therefore becoming uncontrollable as a result. And Saitama, by pushing himself as far as he did without resting, was actually successful in removing his limiter, granting him unlimited power despite his scrawny appearance. You know when you're playing an old video game and you get so many points that the score just resets back to 0? That's basically Saitama. So if that that's the explanation, why are we even talking about this? Well, there's a bit more to examine here than you might initially think. This theory would suggest that, in a sense, desire manifests itself into power for humans. Saitama's desire to become a hero who would destroy his enemies with one punch, matched with his sheer dedication, is actually what got him to become the strongest, and also gain a bunch of other superpowers that he uses, like virtual invulnerability and serious consecutive side hops. That is a real power he uses, and it's the best. But wait a minute, Saitama's the only one who had this desire and in doing so unlocked virtually infinite power? That seems to raise more questions than it answers. The limiter theory works when applied solely to Saitama, but when you start to apply limiters to everyone else, that's when things start to get a bit iffy. There's a ton of people, even others in the Hero Association, that would undoubtedly have the same desire as Saitama, to be the strongest hero. And Genos' claim that Saitama's workout is just standard strength training and furthermore isn't even all that intense would seem to suggest that most other high-ranking heroes would subject themselves to far more rigorous training schedules. And yet, they don't have the same power as Saitama. Wouldn't the sickeningly serious character of Genos have all the same abilities as Saitama, since he's on this whole cliché quest to avenge his family and he'll stop at nothing and all that? It could be argued that since he has cybernetic limbs, he has a sort of artificial skill ceiling that would supersede his limiter. But what about the other heroes we see throughout the show? If strength of resolve means gain of power, wouldn't the hero with the most resolve of any one Moomin Rider have any power as opposed to none? There's also the matter of the many monsters we've met throughout the series. But back in Dr. Genus's explanation of how limiters work, he says that the mutation of a human or animal into a monster is usually driven by something other than will, like an obsession or an outside force like pollution. But their limiters aren't removed or broken in the mutation, so they still have a certain cap on their abilities. Basically, the monsters of One Punch Man operate on a similar system, but it's not quite the same. So why does Saitama get this special treatment when compared to all the other heroes of the association? Is there any explanation we can find that would build onto this limiter theory? Well, possibly. To find out more, we're going to dive into some discussion about Buddhism. But before we do, it's necessary to point out that I'm not a Buddhist, and we're going to be painting with some very broad strokes today. So don't think that everything I say is going to apply to every school of thought or branch of Buddhism. It's a very big religion. So why are we talking about Buddhism? Because there's quite a bit of evidence that points to Saitama's powers being a sort of superhero allegory for Buddhist thinking. But this isn't the same as saying that Saitama has achieved enlightenment or achieved the title of Buddha. Why not? Well, in incredibly general terms, a Buddha is someone who achieves enlightenment by properly realizing and internalizing that the world we live in is impermanent, and therefore long-lasting inner peace is impossible as long as we're striving for these forever fleeting moments that make up our existence. Again, broad strokes, it breaks down into much more detail. But part of how this is done is by more or less relinquishing the need for human emotion. Saitama, while possessing some of these qualities, isn't quite there yet, which is why it makes much more sense to relate him to a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is usually defined as someone who spontaneously desires to follow the path to Buddhahood for the good of others rather than for personal gain. This is true for Saitama because when he faces off against Crablante, a switch is flipped in his mind that sets him on the path to becoming a hero for fun, driven by a desire to help people rather than the self-absorbed world of the Hero Association, where most strive to be better solely to boost their numbers. However, there's still a few things holding Saitama back from reaching enlightenment. While sometimes it appears that Saitama has subconsciously had this key realization that comes with achieving enlightenment, he consciously probably hasn't realized it. It's obvious that Saitama's a little more emotionally dulled than everyone else, but his emotions are definitely still there. He continually strives for impermanent satisfaction in his life. He gets upset at little things like missing sales or being reminded that he's bald. And while it seems like he doesn't care much about his hero rating, he still cares a bit. But for him, it's not a direct evaluation of his self-worth like it is for most others in the Hero Association. But the biggest thing that Saitama still desires despite his overwhelming power is to be challenged. He still believes that there's some enemy out there somewhere that will validate his perceived purpose in life. And to oversimplify it, once he realizes that pursuit is irrelevant, he'll likely find himself more on the path to enlightenment. There are also some other things that would suggest that Saitama's powers are a metaphor for Buddhist thinking. One of the most important steps in achieving enlightenment is through moderation. Specifically in religious teachings, the balance between hedonism, which is the practice of severe self-indulgence, and asceticism, which is the practice of avoiding virtually all indulgence and living off the bare necessities. By not living a completely unhealthy lifestyle, but not committing himself to working out all the time and depriving himself of a life outside of training, Saitama demonstrates this kind of moderation effectively, which could be part of why he was able to remove his limiter. The path to Buddhahood is a moderate practice of spirituality, just as Saitama's workout is a pretty moderate method toward becoming a superhero. To take a closer look as to how this could relate to the limiter concept, it's possible that the limiter is just a generally accepted idea that everyone has a set amount of power that they can have, but it's just an assumption, and most people have a sort of awareness of their own limits. Except, of course, Caped Baldy. Saitama, through his conscious, or more likely unconscious, realization that the limiter in the grand scheme is irrelevant could be what granted him the ability to be so powerful in the first place. In short, the limiter could be a misplaced assumption by others as to the nature of humans, and Saitama's removal of his limiter is his unconscious realization of his true capability. He never thought to think about limits in the first place, so why would he be held back by them? Speculating if there's deeper cultural meaning being communicated through the show is a great exercise, but from a more grounded perspective, we've glossed over the biggest factor when it comes to One Punch Man as a whole: that it's a comedy series. While it's fun to debate whether Saitama or Goku would win in a fight, One Punch Man at its core is meant to be a deconstruction of superhero tropes. No matter what happens, the fundamental trait of Saitama is that he will win, regardless of the circumstance. That's kind of the point. Unless he's fighting one mosquito, but I can't fault him for that, those things are slippery. Getting back to our original theory, based on what we've looked at today, is Saitama a god? Well, kind of, sort of, not really. This one's a bit difficult to grasp, so I'm going to be moderate and rate this conspiracy 2.5 consecutive normal punches out of 5. But what do you think? Do you think Saitama could be some sort of higher being? Are you excited for the second season of One Punch Man? And what underwhelming superpower would you most like to have? For some reason, the two that I always get are either to never get brain freezes again or to never hit red lights again, both of which I don't know why I think of those. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to let us know of any conspiracies you'd like us to take a look at in the future. Until then, be sure to like this video and subscribe to ChannelFrederator for more cartoon conspiracies.